She sang on a street corner with a toy microphone, blind to the world around her, until a billionaire stopped, frozen by her voice. What began as a chance encounter unraveled a secret, sparked a miracle, and changed 3 lives forever. This isn't just a story, it's a transformation. Before we begin, leave a comment below and let us know where you are watching from so we can say hello. Now, let's get into the story. The morning rush in Manhattan moved like a living, breathing organism, cars honking, steam rising from sidewalk grates, sharp heels tapping across concrete in perfect sync with the city's relentless pace. But none of it fazed Daniel Royce, the 40-year-old billionaire CEO of Royce Enterprises. He cut through the chaos like a blade, crisp in his light blue tailored suit that whispered money without shouting it. His hair, dark and perfectly combed, didn't move in the breeze. His ice-gray watch glinted each time he raised his wrist, which he did often, because to Daniel, time wasn't just money. It was power. Every second of his life was calculated, measured, owned. He didn't just walk, he strode with purpose. His thoughts were already 3 meetings ahead, scanning potential mergers and international deals. He didn't stop for small talk, didn't believe in detours. The world, to him, was a battlefield of strategy and control. Emotions were distractions. Empathy? A luxury for the unambitious. But just as he turned onto West 57th Street, a sound pierced through the mechanical rhythm of the morning, a soft, strange melody that seemed out of place, like a drop of honey in black coffee. He took another step, then another, and stopped. It wasn't noise. It wasn't the kind of chaotic, dissonant wailing that often came from street corners where performers fought the city's roar for attention. No, this was different. It was a child's voice. High and light but impossibly clear, it threaded through the soundscape like silk, delicate but unbreakable. It was a song he didn't recognize, simple, maybe even made up, but delivered with such soul, such haunting precision, that it sent a chill down his spine. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He looked around, startled by the fact that his feet had betrayed him, halted him mid-stride in a place where he never stopped. Pedestrians streamed past on either side, glancing at their phones or hailing taxis, unaware of the moment happening in their midst. But Daniel heard it. Felt it. The voice wasn't just pretty, it was honest. There was no performance in it, no showmanship or polish. Just raw, undiluted emotion wrapped in melody. It stirred something in him that had long gone dormant. Daniel turned his head, scanning the sidewalk. And then he saw her. A tiny girl, no older than 6, stood near a weathered lamppost, her pink dress bright as a cherry blossom in the gray of the city. She held a small, plastic toy microphone in both hands, its fake rhinestones catching morning light like little stars. Her long brown hair curled at the ends, bouncing slightly as she swayed to music only she could fully hear. Her lips moved in perfect rhythm, each note escaping with astonishing clarity. Her voice carried, up and out, above the horns and footsteps and chatter. It wasn't forced. It wasn't loud. It was pure. Daniel froze on the sidewalk. People had gathered, forming a quiet semicircle around the girl. Some were recording with their phones. Others just stood in silence, their faces changed by something they couldn't quite explain. There was no shouting, no chaos, just a stillness that hung over the scene like breath held in unison. He stepped closer. She wasn't performing the way trained kids do, no big gestures, no fake smiles. Her song wasn't perfect, but it was alive. There was something raw in her voice. Something honest. The kind of sound that reached under your skin and stirred things you'd buried years ago. As Daniel reached the edge of the crowd, he saw the girl tilt her head gently upward. Her eyes, bright and open, didn't seem to focus on anything. They hovered just above the heads of the audience, unmoving, serene. Her small face glowed with a kind of joy that had nothing to do with attention. She wasn't singing for applause. She was singing because something inside her needed to be heard. And suddenly, Daniel, who measured days in profit margins and rarely paused even for sunsets, realized he wasn't thinking about time. Or his next meeting. Or his status. He was simply listening. When the final note left her lips, the city held its breath. Then came the quiet ripple of claps, soft, reverent. Some people wiped away tears. A few smiled with the kind of warmth usually reserved for homecomings or goodbyes. But the little girl, Maddie Lane, didn't bow. She didn't wave. She just smiled gently into the air. Daniel blinked, stunned at how moved he was. His chest felt tight, like something ancient and asleep inside him had just woken up. He didn't know who she was yet. But he knew one thing. He had to find out. He stepped forward instinctively, compelled by something he couldn't explain. He hadn't meant to approach, but here he was, drawn in by her presence like gravity. The city pulsed around them, but it no longer mattered. Daniel crouched down slowly so as not to tower over her. Up close, she looked even smaller than he expected. There was dirt on her cheek, the hem of her dress was slightly torn, and her shoes were scuffed. And yet, there was nothing pitiable about her. She glowed with something rare. Something fearless. "You have a beautiful voice," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Truly, it's incredible." She turned her head slightly in his direction and smiled. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice calm and polite. Daniel felt something shift inside him. And then, just as he was about to speak again, she said it, gently, without apology. "I'm sorry if I didn't look at you. I'm blind." The words fell between them like a stone into water, quiet, deep, and impossible to ignore. Daniel's breath caught. He wasn't sure what he'd expected to hear, but not that. He'd assumed her stillness was a performer's poise. That her unwavering gaze was a child's imagination. But now, those details clicked into place like a puzzle he didn't know he was solving. Her eyes hadn't followed him because they couldn't. She couldn't see him at all. And yet, she had seen him. Seen through him, in a way few ever had. There was no self-pity in her voice. No tremble. Just honesty. Just truth, delivered with a kind of peace that shattered something inside him. It wasn't a statement meant to gain sympathy. It was a simple explanation, free of bitterness. Daniel swallowed hard. His throat was suddenly tight. "You don't need to be sorry for anything," he said quietly. You sing like the world belongs to you." The girl giggled, a soft, lilting sound. "I like to think it does," she said. "Even if I can't see it." He stared at her, stunned not just by her words, but by the lightness in them. She wasn't afraid of her blindness. She wasn't defined by it. She was defying it, singing through it. Her presence was fearless. Magnetic. A tiny, pink-dressed force of nature on a Manhattan sidewalk. For the first time in years, Daniel Royce forgot about meetings, mergers, deadlines. All he could think about was the fact that this girl, this blind little girl, had stopped him cold in the middle of his perfect routine. And he wasn't ready to walk away. Not now. Not ever. The bell above the cafe door gave a soft chime as Daniel Royce stepped inside Millie's Bean and Bake, a warm contrast to the metallic sharpness of the city just outside. The aroma of roasted espresso and fresh pastries filled the air, wrapping around him like a blanket he hadn't realized he needed. The place was modest, chalkboard menus hung behind the counter, worn bar stools lined the windows, and small flower jars sat on each table, some missing petals but still standing proud. It wasn't luxury, but it had soul. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 30s, wiping down a tray of mismatched mugs with practiced ease. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and there were faint shadows under her eyes, signs of a person who didn't get enough sleep but had no choice but to keep going. When she looked up, Daniel paused. She had the same eyes. Not just in color, a rare, translucent blue, but in their quiet depth. The same eyes that had stared just past him on the sidewalk. The same eyes that had not seen, but somehow knew everything. "Hi there," she said, her voice firm but polite. "What can I get you?" Daniel took a slow step forward. "Sorry to interrupt. I'm not here for coffee. My name is Daniel Royce. I just met your daughter, Maddie, outside. I hope it's okay that I came to speak with you." Her body stiffened ever so slightly. The polite smile on her face faltered for a split second before returning with professional precision. "Is she okay?" she asked, the concern immediate, motherly. "She's more than okay," Daniel assured quickly. "She's remarkable. I was just walking by and I heard her sing. I've never heard something like that before. I don't even have the right words for it." April Lane nodded once, slowly, but her shoulders didn't drop. Her guard was still up. "She loves to sing," she said quietly, then added, "You said Daniel Royce?" He nodded again. Recognition flared in her eyes. "As in, the Daniel Royce? CEO of Royce Capital?" He gave a sheepish smile. "Yeah. I guess the suit gives it away." But instead of being impressed, April's face became more cautious. "So what does a billionaire want with a blind little girl singing on a street corner?" There it was, the weight of reality, of survival, in every syllable. Daniel didn't flinch. He respected the bluntness. Most people danced around their intentions with him. But April didn't have time for pretense. She didn't want charm, she wanted truth. "I don't want anything," he said, and meant it. I had to meet the woman who raised her." For the first time, April looked at him, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. She set the tray of mugs down, her expression softer now, tinged with disbelief. "You really heard her, didn't you?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "I think, she might be the first real thing I've heard in a very long time." And for the first time in years, something shifted in both of them. April didn't reply at first. Her eyes stayed on his face, studying him like she was waiting for the catch, the angle, the unspoken condition. Because help, in her world, never came without a price. "You'll have to forgive me," she said finally. "But people like us, we don't get visits from people like you without a reason." Daniel nodded. He couldn't blame her. "I get that. I do. I've built my whole life on transactions. Nothing comes without strings, I've learned. But this. Maddie, this doesn't feel like one of those things." He paused, then added, "I just wanted to meet the person who gave the world a voice like hers." The air between them settled into something quieter. April's eyes drifted down to the tray she'd been wiping. She didn't speak, but something in her face softened. "She's had a hard life," April said eventually. "But she's never let it change her. Not once. She doesn't complain. Doesn't cry. She just sings." Daniel swallowed hard. The weight of that truth hit him deeper than he expected. "I'm not here to offer charity," he said. "I just want to be someone who's around if you'll let me be. Even if it's just to walk her home sometimes." April looked back at him, the smallest flicker of uncertainty still in her eyes. But then she nodded once. "You can start by walking her home with me after my shift," she said, her voice still guarded, but less brittle. "You'll carry her backpack. She always packs too many books." Daniel smiled, not a business smile. A real one. "I'd be honored." And in that little cafe, among mugs and scones and guarded hearts, something real began. Quietly. Without contracts or conditions. Daniel Royce hadn't altered his schedule for anyone in over a decade. His calendar was a color-coded fortress, meetings stacked back-to-back, days planned down to the minute. His assistant once joked he ran his life like a military operation, and she wasn't wrong. But since the morning he heard Maddie Lane sing, something inside him had shifted, subtly at first, then all at once. At first, it was just a detour. A 5-minute stop at Millie's Bean and Bake before heading to the office. He told himself it was curiosity. A break from routine. But it wasn't long before 5 minutes turned to 20, then 30. By the end of the week, he was arriving earlier just to catch Maddie's first song of the morning. She stood on the same street corner with her worn toy microphone in hand, her little pink dress fluttering in the breeze. Her hair, long and brown, was always neatly combed, and her shoes, though scuffed, were clearly cleaned with care. She'd turn her face slightly toward the sound of the city, listening for clues, adjusting to the rhythm of the morning as naturally as others checked the weather. Daniel would stand at the edge of the circle, never too close, never intrusive, just watching. And listening. One morning, she smiled and said, "You're back again, Mr. Daniel." He was startled she remembered him. "I guess I couldn't stay away," he replied, surprised by his own honesty. She giggled. "That means you're part of the routine now." It became just that. Each day, he met Maddie and her mother, April, after the morning performance. April was always brisk, polite, and just a little guarded. She'd offer him a nod while wiping her hands on a dish towel and check her watch with the efficiency of someone juggling too much. Daniel didn't take it personally. He admired it. April was holding up a world all on her own. At first, she treated Daniel like a stranger walking through a dream she didn't trust. But over time, that changed. Slightly. On the third morning, she poured him a to-go cup of coffee without asking. On the fifth, she called him by name instead of "sir." By the second week, Maddie had begun to expect him. She would wave her toy microphone in the air as he approached. "You missed the first song," she'd scold, grinning. "Then you'll have to sing it again just for me," he'd say. She would. And every time, it felt like a gift. One morning, Maddie took his hand without warning. Her fingers were small, warm, and surprisingly steady. "You're tall," she said matter-of-factly, reaching up and tracing his sleeve. "I am," he agreed, not knowing what else to say. "Do you like being tall?" He laughed. "I've never thought about it. I think it would be nice. You could see more." Daniel swallowed. She didn't mean it with sadness. It wasn't envy, it was curiosity. But the innocence of it hit him hard. April walked up moments later with her usual quick step and a soft smile. "Maddie, don't bother Mr. Royce." "She's not bothering me," Daniel said quickly. April hesitated, then nodded. "I can't stop her from talking to people anyway. She's got her own rhythm." "I like her rhythm," he said honestly. That evening, April let him walk them partway home for the first time. Their walk was filled with Maddie's narration of the world as she imagined it. "I think the buildings are probably silver," she said. "They sound tall. Like they sparkle." She'd ask him to describe colors, the shapes of cars, the way clouds moved. Daniel found himself explaining the world in ways he never had before, poetic, honest, sometimes clumsy. He tried to give her pictures in place of sight. And she devoured every word. April walked beside them, quiet but watchful. Daniel could feel her hesitation. She was used to doing everything alone. Trust didn't come easy. But she didn't stop him when he gently placed a hand on Maddie's shoulder to steady her at a crosswalk. And she smiled, just barely, when Maddie slipped her hand into his again. They reached the edge of their neighborhood just before sunset. The light hit the brick buildings in a warm glow. Daniel had never noticed how beautiful this part of town could be. He usually drove past it without a glance. As they reached the stoop of their building, Maddie turned and said, "Will you come again tomorrow?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes. I will." April looked at him, really looked at him this time. Her voice was soft. "We're not used to people showing up. Not for long." "I'm not most people," Daniel replied gently. She nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to believe that." And with that, they disappeared behind the building's front door, leaving Daniel on the sidewalk, heart full, watching the world he once thought he knew reshape itself, one small step, one small girl, one new routine at a time. The late spring sun dipped low behind the city's jagged skyline, painting the sky in streaks of amber and lavender. The sidewalks of Harlem glowed softly in the fading light, and the usual city chaos had mellowed into a hum of quiet footsteps, honking in the distance, and the occasional laughter echoing from nearby brownstones. Daniel Royce walked with April and Maddie Lane as he often did now, hands in his pockets, his polished shoes oddly scuffed from too many detours through their neighborhood park. What had started as a casual routine had transformed into something deeper, unspoken, and undeniably real. Each evening felt less like a walk home and more like returning to a life he hadn't realized he was missing. That night, Maddie skipped a few steps ahead, her long brown hair catching the last of the sunlight. She hummed to herself, twirling her toy microphone by the handle like it was some sort of magical wand. Every so often, she paused to narrate what she imagined they were passing: a candy store made of clouds, a library where books whispered secrets, a mailbox that only accepted songs instead of letters. April watched her daughter fondly, though her eyes held the exhaustion of someone who had lived too many years with worry as a constant companion. Daniel stole a glance at her when she wasn't looking. He saw the quiet strength in her posture, the way she carried herself with purpose even when weighed down by invisible burdens. He admired her more than he could say. But it was Maddie who broke the silence. Without warning, Maddie slowed her pace, falling in step beside Daniel. She reached out gently, and her small hand found his without hesitation. She gripped his fingers tightly, not like a child seeking help to cross the street, but like someone making sure you didn't drift too far. Daniel's heart jumped in his chest. She didn't turn her head toward him, didn't even stop walking. Her gaze was still somewhere in the distant beyond, eyes unfocused but full of quiet thought. Then, in her soft, matter-of-fact tone, she asked a question that caught him off guard. "Did you used to be sad before you met me?" He froze. His steps faltered. Maddie's words didn't carry the innocence of a child guessing emotions, they held something deeper, more knowing. It wasn't a question meant to tease or play. It was something rooted in the way she understood people, not with her eyes, but with her spirit. Daniel looked down at her, his throat tightening. "I think I forgot what not being sad felt like," he said quietly. "Until you reminded me." She nodded as if that answer made perfect sense, like she'd already known it. "Sometimes I think people get lost," she said. "Not on streets, but inside themselves." Daniel's mouth parted, but no words came. He had led global summits, stood in boardrooms with the world's most powerful people. Yet no speech, no pitch, no executive briefing had ever stunned him into silence the way Maddie just had. "And how do you think they find their way back?" he asked eventually, his voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged, still holding his hand. "Someone sings to them," she said simply. "Or holds their hand. Like this." Daniel squeezed her hand gently, grounding himself in the moment. He felt his chest swell, not with sadness, but something unfamiliar. Peace. Gratitude. Maybe even a flicker of joy. Up ahead, April had paused at the corner to check her phone. The wind caught a few loose strands of her hair, turning them gold in the streetlight. Daniel watched her silhouette for a moment longer than he should have. There was something almost surreal about the way she stood there, tired but luminous. This was not a woman defined by her hardships, but by how she faced them. As they caught up to her, Maddie let go of Daniel's hand and went racing ahead, arms out like wings. "I'm flying," she shouted. April smiled, sliding her phone back into her bag. "She does that when she's happy." She should always be flying, Daniel said. April looked at him then, really looked. She never used to reach for people like that. Daniel swallowed, unsure what to say. April continued, her voice quieter. She's opened up more since you've been around. I don't know what you're doing, but it's good. Daniel didn't have the words for what it meant to hear that. He only knew that somewhere between boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, he had stopped reaching for people too. And now, a 6-year-old blind girl had found his hand, and in doing so, had found his heart. That evening, as they reached their building and said their goodbyes, Daniel turned to leave but paused. He looked back one last time. Maddie stood on the stoop, waving toward the sound of his footsteps. Not blindly, not aimlessly. Just certain. And for the first time in years, Daniel Royce didn't feel lost. He felt found. Daniel stood in the hallway outside their apartment, his hand hovering for a second before knocking on the door. The hallway was dimly lit, quiet except for the soft hum of an elevator descending. He'd walked Maddie and April home many times by now, but this evening was different. Tonight, April had turned to him at the bottom of the stairs and said softly, "Would you like to come in for tea?" That simple invitation had made his pulse quicken. Now, as the door creaked open, the warmth from inside poured out like a sigh. April stood there in a faded t-shirt and joggers, her dark blonde hair pulled into a tired bun, her eyes rimmed with the wear of the day. But there was something in her expression, soft, open, still guarded, but less rigid than before. "Come on in," she said, stepping aside. Daniel entered carefully, like he was crossing into sacred space. The apartment was small, lived in, with a sense of gentle chaos. Hand-drawn pictures lined the fridge, bookshelves bowed under the weight of old storybooks, and the faint scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. It smelled like safety. Maddie sat in the corner, legs tucked under her, quietly humming as she built something with colorful plastic blocks. Her head tilted slightly toward the sounds of her mother's footsteps, and she smiled when she heard Daniel's voice. "Hi, Mr. Daniel." "Hi, superstar," he said gently, bending slightly as he passed her. April motioned to the small kitchen table. "Sit. I'll get the tea." Daniel pulled out a mismatched chair, his tailored blazer suddenly feeling out of place in a room so filled with warmth and heart. As April busied herself at the stove, Daniel glanced around. The walls had cracks, the couch had threads pulled loose, but the space radiated care. It felt real. April placed a steaming mug in front of him and sat down across the table, cupping her own mug between both hands. "You don't act like a billionaire," she said suddenly, her eyes meeting his. Daniel blinked, caught off guard by her bluntness. Then he chuckled softly. "What's a billionaire supposed to act like?" April shrugged. "Detached. Distracted. Like there's somewhere better to be." He looked down into his tea, his voice quiet. "I used to be that way. But then I met your daughter." Silence settled over the table like a thick blanket. The kind of silence that comes when truth hangs in the air, raw and unresolved. April's fingers tightened around her mug. "You've been kind, Daniel. More than kind. But I have to ask, why? What do you want from us?" Daniel looked up, her words striking something deep. "Nothing," he said firmly. "I don't want anything. He paused, searching for the words. "The first time I heard Maddie sing, something cracked open inside me. I've spent most of my life being untouchable. But her voice, it got to me. She got to me." April studied him. Her eyes, tired and skeptical, slowly softened. "You're not the first person who's felt something when they heard her. But you're the first one who didn't just drop $1 and walk away." "I couldn't," he said. "I didn't want to." She nodded slowly. "We're not rich, Daniel. We're not even stable most months. I work 2 jobs, rent is a nightmare, and her school's barely equipped for her needs. But we manage. We've learned how to survive. I'm proud of that. I know you are, he said quietly. You've done an incredible job. Maddie, she's extraordinary. She is, April agreed, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. But I've always worried that people would see her as fragile. Or broken. She's not. She's whole. Even if the world doesn't know how to treat her. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I don't see her as fragile. I see her as the strongest person I've ever met. April's eyes glistened. She blinked quickly and looked away. She sees people, she whispered. In a way the rest of us don't. After you met her the first time, she told me something. She said, Mom, I think that man is carrying something heavy, but he doesn't know how to put it down. Daniel froze. His throat tightened. Of all the boardroom criticisms he'd faced in his life, nothing had landed like that. He didn't respond right away. He couldn't. April reached across the table slowly and placed her hand over his. Her touch was light, hesitant, but steady. You don't have to carry it alone. For a long moment, Daniel didn't speak. He just looked down at their hands, at the connection so simple and yet so foreign to him. No agenda. No pitch. Just kindness. And for the first time in years, Daniel Royce believed that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. It had been almost 2 months since Daniel Royce first heard Maddie Lane's voice echo across a street corner in Manhattan. In that time, the sharp corners of his once sterile routine had softened. His world, once mapped out in 15-minute calendar blocks, now revolved around stories Maddie told about colors she couldn't see and the laughter April let slip when she forgot to guard her heart. He had found himself caring, not from obligation, but from a place he thought had long gone numb. That afternoon, as they walked from Millie's Bean and Bake toward the small park where Maddie liked to feel the sun on her face, Daniel kept glancing sideways at her. Her tiny hand was wrapped tightly around his fingers, swinging freely as she balanced along the edge of the curb, pretending it was a tightrope. April walked just ahead, checking her phone, but even then, her steps matched their pace. Their rhythm had become unconsciously synchronized. Hey Maddie, Daniel said, his voice casual, but there was a flicker of tension in it. Yeah, she replied, arms stretched out like wings, her toy microphone tucked under one elbow. I've been thinking about your singing, he began. Maddie stopped walking, her head tilted toward him in that way she had, curious, open. I like singing, she said simply. I know you do, Daniel smiled. And I was wondering, what if more people got to hear you? On purpose this time. Not just by passing by on the street. Maddie's brow furrowed a little. Like a concert? Exactly, he said. A small one. Nothing big or scary. Just a stage, a few musicians, some people sitting and really listening. I think they'd love it. I know I would. Ahead of them, April turned sharply, her face already wary. A concert, she repeated, her tone measured. Daniel, she's 6. She's never done anything like that. I don't know if she's ready. I want to try, Maddie interrupted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. April blinked, caught off guard. Sweetheart, you don't have to say yes just to make someone happy, April said gently, crouching beside her daughter. If it's too much, we don't. It's not to make anyone happy but me, Maddie said, nodding firmly. I want to sing where people come just to hear. Not by accident. On purpose. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. This tiny girl, who had once sung on a dirty corner with a plastic microphone, now wanted to share her gift with the world, not for applause, but for meaning. Because she believed in what it could make people feel. April still looked uncertain. Her hands reached up to smooth Maddie's curls, her fingers trembling just slightly. Only if you're sure, she murmured. I'm sure, Maddie said, gripping her mother's wrist gently. And you'll be there, right? April nodded, brushing a kiss onto her forehead. Every second. Later that evening, as the three of them sat on a bench near the dog park, Daniel with a latte in hand, Maddie eating from a small cup of strawberry ice cream, he explained the plan in more detail. It wouldn't be flashy. No reporters. No loud speakers or chaotic crowds. He would handle everything personally. I'll use a small venue, outdoors, near Central Park, he said. I'll make sure it feels like magic. The right kind. Gentle magic. April narrowed her eyes at him. You've thought this through. I have, he admitted. Because it matters. She studied him, silently, for several seconds. You don't do anything halfway, do you? Daniel chuckled softly. Not when it's important. Maddie leaned her head against his arm, her ice cream nearly forgotten. I want twinkle lights, she murmured. You'll have them, he promised. White ones. Soft ones. Like stars. April sighed, not in frustration but in surrender. Okay. We'll try it. But if she gets scared, we stop. No questions asked. Of course, he said. And no exploitation. No cameras in her face. No scouts. No promises to record labels. Daniel nodded. Nothing she doesn't want. Ever. They sat like that for a while longer, the evening breeze cool against their skin. Maddie hummed softly, lost in her own thoughts, and Daniel closed his eyes for just a moment, letting the sound of her voice, low and calm, settle into the quiet places of his heart. In that moment, the concert stopped being an event. It became a mission. He wasn't launching a debut. He was creating a space, one where the world would finally listen, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. And maybe, just maybe, he was preparing to listen too, for the first time in his life. The sun had dipped low over Central Park, casting a warm amber glow over the small outdoor venue nestled just off the east meadow. Rows of folding chairs were set out beneath a canopy of soft white light strung between the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. It wasn't a grand hall or a sold-out theater, but to Daniel Royce, it felt perfect. This wasn't meant to be a spectacle. It was meant to be real. He stood backstage near the simple wooden platform that served as the stage, adjusting the collar of his suit and glancing at the crowd as it began to gather. Families, neighbors, strangers from the neighborhood and beyond, all drawn by quiet whispers of a girl with a gift. He could see the flicker of candles, the camera phones resting for once in pockets, people simply waiting, hopeful. Behind the curtain, Maddie Lane stood in her sky-blue dress, her small fingers curled gently around the microphone. Not her toy microphone, this one was real. Matte black, wireless, balanced perfectly in her tiny hand. She wore white flats and a ribbon in her brown hair, carefully pinned to one side by her mother, April. Daniel knelt beside her. Are you nervous? He asked softly. Maddie tilted her head thoughtfully, her expression calm. A little, she admitted. But it feels like standing in the dark with music. That's not scary. That's home. Daniel didn't know what to say. His throat tightened. He reached out and gave her hand a quick, reassuring squeeze. She gave a small nod and smiled. The event had no MC, no opening act, no announcements blaring through the speakers. Just a hush that slowly spread through the audience like a ripple across a still pond. When the soft glow of the stage lights came on, revealing Maddie standing alone in the center, the air shifted. Stillness. Expectation. And then she sang. Her voice, barely above a whisper at first, floated into the night like a breeze across still water. Pure, clear, untouched by stage fright or pretense. It rose with each verse, gaining strength, warmth, and texture, like light pouring through stained glass. She didn't move much. No forced gestures or polished choreography. She simply stood there, grounded and present, as the melody flowed from somewhere deep inside her. Behind the stage, Daniel stood frozen. He had heard her sing before, on the sidewalk, in cafes, on walks home. But this was different. This wasn't just beautiful. It was transcendent. It was the sound of someone showing the world who they really were, without apology. The audience didn't fidget. No one spoke. Not even a cough. They sat, mesmerized, as Maddie's voice carried them through verses of longing, light, and wonder. Her song spoke of blue skies she'd never seen, colors she imagined, the warmth of her mother's hand, and the sound of footsteps she'd memorized by heart. It wasn't a song about being blind. It was a song about being, about existing, loving, dreaming, even without sight. April stood near the edge of the stage, her hands clasped tightly in front of her chest, her eyes shimmering. Every word Maddie sang hit her like a wave, full of pride and heartbreak and awe. To watch her daughter stand there so unafraid, so radiant, was almost too much. She felt her knees weaken but stayed grounded, not daring to miss a second. When Maddie reached the final line, her voice dropped into a whisper again, delicate but unshaken. She held the last note for a breath longer than anyone expected, her face lifted slightly as if she were singing to the stars themselves. Then silence. A moment passed. 2. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for applause, but reverence. And then the crowd rose. Not with thunderous cheering, but with a standing ovation full of quiet awe. Some people clapped with their hands over their hearts. Others simply stood still, blinking back tears, unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a performance, it was a gift. One that left them better than it found them. Maddie bowed her head slightly, then turned and walked off the stage, her steps confident and graceful. She moved as if she could see every inch of the path ahead, though Daniel knew she couldn't. Not yet. He and April met her at the edge of the stage. Daniel's eyes were damp. He didn't try to hide it. He looked at Maddie, this little girl with a microphone and a ribbon in her hair, and felt something ancient and sacred unfold inside him. "That was beautiful," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Maddie tilted her head, as though listening to the sound of her impact in the space around them. "I think they felt it," she said. "I hope it made someone less lonely." April gathered her in a hug so tight it made Maddie laugh softly. "You made the world feel something tonight," she whispered into her daughter's hair. As the lights dimmed and the chairs were slowly folded away, Daniel stood silently beside them, hands in his pockets, his heart full. He didn't need to speak. He knew the truth now. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. By the time the folding chairs had been packed up and the string lights unplugged, Daniel Royce thought the evening couldn't have been more perfect. Maddie's performance under the warm canopy of stars was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It wasn't just beautiful, it was transformative. The silence of the crowd afterward had spoken louder than thunderous applause. It was as though the world had stopped breathing, just to listen. Maddie had fallen asleep curled up on a bench backstage, her blue dress rumpled, her toy microphone still clutched in her arms like a keepsake. April sat beside her, one hand gently brushing the girl's hair away from her forehead, the other rubbing her own tired eyes. Daniel stood a few feet away, letting them have the moment. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That's when his phone buzzed. It was a message from his executive assistant, Nolan, someone who rarely contacted him outside working hours unless it was urgent. Daniel glanced at the screen, expecting a scheduling conflict or travel reminder. But what he saw made him freeze. The performance clips up. It's going viral. Already past 1 million views. Daniel stared at the message. 1 million. The number didn't seem real. It had only been an hour since the concert ended. He quickly opened the link. The thumbnail showed Maddie standing on stage, framed by soft lights, her eyes wide, her voice mid-note. The caption read, "Blind girl's voice leaves audience breathless, you need to hear this." Daniel tapped play. The short, 2-minute clip had been taken by one of the event's staff on a handheld camera. The footage wasn't perfect, slightly shaky and dim, but none of that mattered. Because Maddie's voice cut through it all like sunlight through storm clouds. Even on a phone speaker, her emotion radiated. The comments below flooded in by the second. "Who is she? I can't stop crying. This little girl just gave me hope again. I need to know more about her." Daniel scrolled, his heart pounding. There were thousands of shares. Hundreds of tags. Tweets, reposts, stories. It was spreading faster than anything he'd ever seen, faster than some of his company's most successful PR campaigns. And yet, the usual thrill of viral momentum never came. Instead, his chest filled with something heavier, responsibility. He looked over at Maddie again, still asleep, her small body curled peacefully in a world that had just changed without her knowing. She didn't care about likes, shares, or internet fame. She sang because it brought light to people. Because it brought her joy. She wasn't ready for this flood. The world wasn't kind when it wanted something. April noticed his expression shift. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Daniel hesitated, then held out the phone. "Someone from the crew filmed it. It's online. And, it's everywhere already." April's face paled. She stood slowly, careful not to wake Maddie, and took the phone from him. Her eyes scanned the screen, the comment count, the flood of reactions. She set her jaw, the lines around her eyes tightening. "They're going to try and take her," she said, voice flat. "Exploit her. Promise her the world just to sell her voice." Daniel nodded. "Not if I can help it." He made 3 calls before leaving the venue. First to his legal counsel, instructing them to draft immediate copyright protections and release control over the video through his foundation, Voice in the Light, ensuring Maddie's image and performance couldn't be used without their explicit consent. Second, to his cybersecurity chief, requesting a sweep of Maddie and April's digital presence to monitor for unauthorized leaks or invasive media attention. And third, to his executive producer at Axon Group's media division, ordering that no company assets or affiliates were to approach Maddie with business offers, ever. "This isn't a PR stunt," he told them. "This is personal. Treat it like that." As they packed up to leave the venue, April's arm around her sleeping daughter, she looked at Daniel with wary eyes. "You still sure you want to be in this?" Daniel didn't flinch. More than ever. He walked behind them as they headed to the car. He wasn't just protecting Maddie from the media storm. He was protecting something sacred. The girl who once sang into a toy microphone on a Manhattan street corner had cracked open the world with her honesty. And now that the world had seen her, he'd make damn sure it never tried to take more than she was ready to give. For Daniel, a man who once measured his value in deals closed and stocks risen, this moment was his new bottom line. This child. Her voice. Her light. And the family they were slowly becoming. As the car pulled away into the night, the city lights flashing past their windows, his phone buzzed again. 10 million views. Daniel didn't look. He reached over and gently pulled a blanket over Maddie's shoulders, tucking her in like a father would. Let the world watch. He'd be the one holding the line. The days following Maddie's public concert settled into a strange calm. Though the world online buzzed with her name, the blind angel of Central Park, they called her, inside the cafe and their Harlem apartment, life went on. April still clocked in early at Millie's Bean and Bake. Maddie still sang into her toy microphone at home while doing her alphabet homework. And Daniel Royce kept showing up, not as a billionaire, not as a hero, but simply as a man who found peace in their presence. But then, one morning, a cream-colored envelope arrived at the cafe. It was addressed to April Lane, in precise, careful handwriting. The return address bore the name of a prestigious pediatric ophthalmology clinic in Boston. April nearly dropped the tray of mugs she was carrying when she saw it. Her fingers trembled as she slit the envelope open. She read the letter once, then again. Then a third time, slowly, her lips parting slightly with each sentence. The ink on the page may as well have been fire, burning through years of buried hope, untouched dreams, and unspoken what-ifs. The letter was from Dr. Amelia Novak, a renowned specialist in childhood blindness and retinal disorders. She had seen Maddie's video online, like millions of others. But unlike others, she had recognized something in Maddie's voice, the fierce intelligence, the emotional awareness. She had then, through discreet connections, accessed Maddie's medical records. And the letter said something April hadn't allowed herself to imagine in years. There is a chance, however small, that Maddie's vision could be partially or even fully restored. She didn't speak of miracles. She spoke of science, of experimental therapies involving gene correction and retinal implant procedures. The clinic had been conducting trials with some success, and Maddie's case profile aligned with one of their most promising categories. It wasn't a guarantee. In fact, the odds were daunting. Less than 30%. But they weren't zero. April sat at a small table in the back corner of the cafe, staring at the letter, not noticing the coffee cooling beside her. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just sat in silent disbelief, as if breathing too hard might break the fragile possibility the letter contained. That afternoon, when Daniel arrived for his usual visit, he found her still sitting there. She looked up as he approached, eyes glassy, hands still holding the pages like they might disappear. "I want you to read something," she said quietly, passing him the letter. Daniel took it gently, aware of the weight in her voice. As his eyes scanned the words, his usual unreadable CEO face began to soften. His brows furrowed. His mouth pressed into a line. And when he looked back at April, something flickered in his gaze, something between hope and fear. "She's already so strong," April said, her voice breaking slightly. "What if we do this and it changes her? What if she loses that light inside?" Daniel folded the letter with reverence, like it was holy. He looked her straight in the eyes. "And what if it works?" he said gently. "What if she sees you for the first time? Sees the world she's only sung about? Isn't that worth the risk?" April let out a sound that was half a laugh, half a sob. "You don't understand. I gave up on this years ago. Hope is dangerous. It hurts too much to lose again." Daniel leaned forward, his voice low but full of emotion. "I've spent most of my life betting on things with worse odds than this. But I've never had anything matter to me like this does. If there's even a sliver of a chance, shouldn't we take it?" She said nothing, just stared down at the letter again. A piece of paper with a possibility too big for her heart to fully hold. But slowly, she began to shift in her seat. Not away from it, but toward it. Toward hope. Later that night, as Maddie sat on the rug humming to herself while building a tower out of wooden blocks, April watched her daughter with a kind of awe. That little girl, who had never once complained, never once begged for more than she had, deserved the world. And now, maybe, just maybe, she could see it. 2 weeks later, with arrangements made by Daniel's private team, the three of them boarded a flight to Boston. Daniel had secured a peaceful suite at a family lodge near the clinic, a space full of natural light and soft blankets and lavender-scented air. The night before the surgery, April found herself awake, staring out the window while Maddie slept peacefully in the next room. Daniel joined her in the quiet. "What if this changes everything?" she whispered. Daniel replied softly, "Then let it. As long as it's for her." In the dark stillness of that Boston night, with the stars barely visible beyond the clouds, they stood together, two people who never imagined they'd share a future, willing to take a leap for a little girl who had already changed their lives in ways no miracle ever could. The hospital halls in Boston were still at sunrise, painted in a sterile blue glow under the dim lights. April Lane sat in a chair that had long since lost its comfort, her back stiff, hands clenched in her lap, and eyes locked on the door to Maddie's recovery room. Across the room, Daniel Royce stood by the window, shoulders tense, arms folded, watching the city wake up beyond the glass. It had been 4 days since the surgery. 4 days of cautious optimism. 4 days of silent prayers neither April nor Daniel had dared to speak aloud. The doctors had warned them, the healing process would take time. Even if it worked, Maddie would need to relearn how to process the visual world. Nothing was guaranteed. But still, there was hope. And that was almost more terrifying than despair. That morning, a soft knock broke the silence. Dr. Levin, the lead surgeon, stepped into the room wearing gentle eyes and a calm expression. "We're ready," he said. "We can begin removing the bandages." April's heart thundered. She rose to her feet too quickly, grabbing the side of the chair to steady herself. Daniel was already walking toward Maddie's bedside, his every step filled with purpose but weighed by emotion. Inside the room, Maddie lay still, wrapped in thin hospital blankets, her head resting peacefully against the pillow. Her face was relaxed, but there was a subtle tension in her small body, like she was bracing herself for a world she had never seen. The nurses dimmed the lights and moved with practiced grace. April took Maddie's right hand, Daniel took her left. She reached out instinctively, her little fingers curling into his without hesitation. "You're here," she whispered. "I told you I would be," Daniel replied, his voice barely more than a breath. The nurse began unwrapping the bandages layer by layer, each pass slower than the last, as though time itself was reluctant to move forward. The room was silent except for the faint beeping of machines and the sound of their breathing. As the final piece of gauze was lifted, Maddie blinked against the dim light. Her eyelids fluttered once, twice. Her irises, once clouded with blindness, now moved, focused, alive. The change was subtle but undeniable. She squinted, then blinked again. Her eyes darted around, unfocused at first, until something clicked. Her gaze caught the faint glow of the overhead light. She flinched slightly, adjusting. Then, she turned. "Mom," she said, hesitantly. April gasped, her other hand flying to her mouth. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Maddie turned her head toward her mother's voice, her eyes narrowing, struggling, but focusing. A beat passed. Then another. "I see you," she said, the words cracked with wonder. "Mom. I see you." April broke completely, collapsing onto the side of the bed, cradling Maddie's face in her trembling hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she kissed her daughter's forehead over and over. "Thank you," she whispered, to the doctors, to Daniel, to the universe, to whoever was listening. Daniel stepped back for a moment, overwhelmed. He had stood in rooms filled with world leaders. He had closed billion-dollar deals without blinking. But this? This moment unraveled him. Maddie turned again, slowly this time, and looked at Daniel. Her expression was uncertain at first, her eyes still adjusting. She blinked, tilted her head. Then, for the first time, her eyes locked onto his. "You look kind," she said with a tiny smile. "Your voice is warmer than your face. But I like both." Daniel laughed. It was a laugh pulled from deep within him, the kind he didn't even remember knowing how to make. He knelt beside her, his hand still holding hers. "I've been waiting to see you see," he whispered. "And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed." Maddie grinned, beaming now, and squeezed his hand. "You were the first thing I saw clearly, you know. That's pretty cool." April reached over and touched Daniel's arm, grounding them all in that shared miracle. The doctors stepped back, giving them space. The nurse slipped quietly from the room, leaving behind a stillness that didn't feel clinical, but sacred. In that small hospital room, under soft lights and the rhythmic sound of Maddie's heart monitor, 3 people sat suspended in a new beginning. Not a perfect one. Not the end of their journey. But a turning point so profound that none of them would ever forget how it felt. Because the moment Maddie opened her eyes, they all began to see differently, not just with sight, but with their hearts. And for the first time in her life, Maddie Lane saw the world she had only sung about. And it was brighter than she ever imagined. Daniel stood in the hospital room, watching as April cradled Maddie gently in her arms. The gauze that had once cloaked the girl's eyes now sat in a trash bin, irrelevant. What mattered now was the light in Maddie's face, the wonder in her gaze as she turned to explore every detail of the world she had once only imagined. "Mom. I see you." The words echoed in Daniel's mind hours after they had left Maddie's lips. He had seen and done many things in his life, negotiated billion-dollar mergers, walked across the stages of elite conferences, held the keys to skyscrapers, but nothing had ever gripped his soul the way that moment had. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just stood there, letting his eyes soak in what hers finally could. Later, as the initial chaos subsided, Daniel found himself walking the quiet corridors of the hospital beside April. She was still shaken, her hand trailing along the wall like she was grounding herself in reality. "She looked at me," April whispered. For the first time, she really looked at me. Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They said goodnight to Maddie and returned to the small lodge room the clinic had provided. It was quiet there, tucked away from the noise of the world that now knew their daughter's name. Maddie had fallen asleep almost instantly, exhausted from both the procedure and the surge of emotion that had followed. She was curled under a light blanket, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, the other clutching her toy microphone like a lifeline. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped between his knees. April sat across from him in silence. The air was thick with unspoken feelings. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think it would be easier if I never hoped for this. That if I let go of the dream, I wouldn't be disappointed." Daniel looked up, his voice low. "But you never let it go." April met his eyes. "No. Because some part of me believed the world still had room for miracles." He stood then and moved toward the kitchen counter, pouring 2 mugs of tea. The ritual helped steady them both. He handed her a mug and they sipped in silence. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about everything." April arched a brow. "That's a lot of everything." Daniel smiled faintly. "It is. But I keep coming back to the same place. That apartment of yours. Maddie's hand-drawn stars on the fridge. The cinnamon scent. The 3 of us sitting on the floor after dinner. That's where it started to make sense. Life. Connection." April blinked. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to be a visitor anymore," he said, more nervous than he had expected to be. "I don't want to go back to empty penthouses and hollow meetings. I want mornings with her voice, and nights making dinner together. I want us." April didn't reply right away. She just set down her mug, crossed the room, and took his hand. "I don't need a savior, Daniel," she said gently. "And Maddie doesn't need a hero. But we both need someone who stays. I will." His voice was certain. "If you'll let me, I'll stay." The next day, they returned to New York, and Daniel didn't go back to his high-rise. Instead, he followed them back to the modest apartment in Harlem. The doorman at his old building would later tell staff Daniel never returned, save to retrieve a few personal boxes. He began staying with April and Maddie, first for dinner, then overnight. He took the couch at first, respectfully distant, but present. Maddie would often wake up early and sneak into the living room to wake him. She'd tap his forehead and whisper, "Time for the real world, Daniel." One evening, As the sun dipped behind the Harlem skyline, Daniel stood in the doorway holding a small box. April looked at him curiously. "What's that?" He handed it to her without a word. Inside was a key. "I bought a townhouse," he said. "It's a few blocks from here. 3 bedrooms. A backyard. Close to Maddie's school and the cafe. It's not big or flashy. But it's ours. If you want it." April stared at him, her eyes welling. "You did all that without asking?" Daniel's smile was soft. "It didn't feel like a decision. It felt like a step I was already taking." She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned in and kissed him, gently, fully, finally. Weeks later, they moved into that house together. Maddie ran through every room laughing, claiming each one as if they had always belonged to her. And on the first night in their new home, Maddie climbed into their bed just before dawn, whispering sleepily, "Now we're really a we." Neither Daniel nor April responded with words. They didn't have to. They simply wrapped their arms around her and held on, as the sun rose on a family that had never been planned, but had always been destined. Daniel Royce stood at the edge of the modest kitchen, watching April Lane chop vegetables with effortless grace. Sunlight streamed in through the small window, catching in her hair and casting golden shadows across the counter. Maddie, now 7, sat cross-legged at the dining table, humming softly while coloring a page from her new book, a scene of a park with children holding balloons. The house, a 3-bedroom townhouse tucked near Maddie's school in Upper Manhattan, was nothing like Daniel's old penthouse in Midtown. But somehow, it felt more like home than anywhere he'd ever lived. He hadn't made a big announcement when he sold the top floor of his luxury high-rise. There were no press releases, no internal memos. He simply handed his real estate team the keys and quietly bought this townhouse, a place with creaky floorboards, chipped baseboards, and endless warmth. April discovered it by accident one morning when she saw a pair of unfamiliar keys hanging on a small hook by the door. She had paused, turned to him with a puzzled smile, and asked, "Is that what I think it is?" Daniel had just nodded. "It's home, if you want it to be." They moved in together later that spring. There was no dramatic unveiling, no moving trucks with designer furniture. Most of the pieces were already April's, worn but cared for. Daniel brought very little. Just himself. That, and a deep desire to build something lasting. The townhouse slowly transformed. The walls began to display framed drawings from Maddie, photographs of their walks through Central Park, and printed out snapshots of her first performance. The kitchen always had a supply of her favorite yogurt. Her toy microphone sat proudly on a shelf near the entryway, next to a new reel one, silver, sleek, a gift from Daniel on her 7th birthday. Daniel had never imagined this kind of life. He had once calculated success in quarterly earnings, mergers, and international headlines. But now, success looked like Maddie calling from her bedroom, "Daniel, can you help me with the zipper?" or April falling asleep beside him while reading a book, her head gently resting against his shoulder. He learned to braid Maddie's hair on Sunday mornings. It wasn't perfect, his fingers were clumsy, but she always wore it proudly, calling it her CEO braid. April teased him about it, and he teased her back, and their laughter became part of the soundtrack of this new life. Maddie, for her part, flourished. The therapy sessions continued, 3 times a week to help her brain process the tidal wave of visual information. She remained patient and eager, her mind absorbing the world like a sponge. Her resilience astounded even the therapists. She had a habit of asking questions that cut to the heart of things. One morning, while Daniel was driving her to an appointment, she looked out the window and said, "Why does everything move so fast, even when people look so tired?" Daniel hadn't known how to answer that. But it stayed with him. He changed, too. Slowly, steadily. His work hours shortened. His phone calls became fewer. He no longer answered emails after 8 p.m., and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't feel guilty about it. He found fulfillment in the everyday, grocery runs with April, assembling IKEA bookshelves with Maddie giving him dramatic, step-by-step instructions from the floor, and falling asleep on the couch while watching cartoons none of them really understood but all of them enjoyed. One Friday evening, as spring faded into summer, Daniel surprised them both with news. He had helped organize a community concert, an outdoor event focused on supporting visually impaired children. It would include live music, art installations, and scholarships under the new foundation he'd launched quietly, Voice in the Light, named after the first video of Maddie that had touched the world. When he told Maddie, she blinked, stunned. "Do I get to sing again?" she asked, her voice half whisper, half hope. "Only if you want to," Daniel replied gently. She paused, looked out the window, then back at him. "I want to sing, but this time, I want to sing for all the kids who can't find the light yet." Daniel's throat tightened. He nodded slowly, blinking away the weight behind his eyes. Later that night, Maddie snuggled between them in bed, her tiny hand curled over Daniel's chest, her other resting in April's. She yawned and whispered, "Now we're really a we. Like a real family." They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. Daniel just held her tighter, felt April shift closer, and closed his eyes in the dark, finally content in a life where love didn't need luxury, just presence. It was no longer about saving Maddie. It was about building with her. A future. A family. A forever. The summer evening air felt soft and golden as Daniel Royce stood behind the stage, his hand resting lightly on Maddie's shoulder. She was dressed in a sky blue dress she had chosen herself, her favorite color now that she could finally see it. Her long brown hair had been brushed and clipped to the side with a pearl barrette, a gift from April. She held her microphone, not the toy one she had once gripped on the street corner, but a real one, sleek and black, perfectly sized for her small hand. Across the grassy amphitheater, children played under lantern-lit trees while parents arranged folding chairs. Families had come from all across the city, some of them strangers, some of them supporters of Daniel's new nonprofit foundation, Voice in the Light. Inspired by Maddie's first song, the foundation provided music programs and therapy for children with visual impairments. This concert was their first live event. But for Daniel, it was more than a mission. It was personal. April stood just off stage in a simple navy dress, her hands clasped nervously. Her eyes tracked Maddie like a compass to its north. Even after months of transformation, it was still hard to believe her daughter was here, healthy, seeing, confident. Daniel leaned toward Maddie. "Are you ready?" She nodded, calm and steady, her eyes scanning the stage. "I'm not just singing tonight," she whispered. "I'm thanking the world." The moment she stepped into the warm light of center stage, the audience fell still. Even the breeze quieted. No introduction, no pre-recorded fanfare, just Maddie Lane, 7 years old, standing in the glow of twilight. She raised the microphone, looked out over the crowd, and smiled. Her voice came, not loud or forced, but honest and full of soul. She sang of light, what it meant to her before she saw it, and what it means now. She sang of color, of her mother's laugh, of Daniel's face and how it wasn't as serious as it had sounded. Her lyrics were simple, but her voice had grown, richer, fuller, touched with depth that defied her age. She wasn't singing for fame. She was telling a story. Her story. As the final verse faded into the evening air, no one moved. The amphitheater remained suspended in silence, the kind that follows something sacred. Then came the standing ovation, not thunderous, but reverent. People wiped tears from their eyes. Others simply placed a hand over their hearts, unsure of how else to respond. April stood just off stage, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other gripping Daniel's. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her tears spoke for her. Maddie turned, stepped off the stage, and walked straight into their arms. She was glowing, not with adrenaline, but with peace. "Did I do okay?" she asked, blinking up at them. April dropped to her knees and pulled her daughter close. "You did more than okay, baby," she said through quiet sobs. "You moved the sky." Daniel crouched beside them, his palms gently cradling Maddie's face. "I've never been prouder of anything in my entire life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Maddie beamed, her eyes reflecting the stage lights behind them. "I just wanted people to feel seen," she whispered. Later that night, after the folding chairs had been packed away, the sound crew had gone home, and only stars remained to light the path. The three of them walked home together, Maddie in the middle, holding a hand from each of them. The city was quiet now. The kind of quiet that made everything feel personal. "I think I want to be a teacher one day," Maddie said suddenly. "Or maybe a mom. Or maybe someone who helps kids not be scared when things get dark." April smiled softly. "You can be all of those things, sweetheart." Daniel nodded, his voice steady but warm. "Whatever you decide, we'll be behind you. Always." Maddie gave their hands a gentle squeeze. "You know what I like best?" she asked. "When I call you Mom and Dad, it feels right. Like it was always supposed to be that way." Neither Daniel nor April spoke. They didn't need to. They just tightened their grip on her hands, guiding her forward beneath the quiet stars. Their shadows, three of them now, stretched long across the sidewalk, interwoven and solid, as if stitched by fate itself. And though the city behind them kept moving, noisy and indifferent as ever, it no longer felt like something they had to conquer. It felt like something they could finally share. Not as a billionaire, a single mother, and a blind girl. But a future, a family. Forever. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.